And yours is on?
Good morning, everyone. I'm always amazed. Every once in a while, you can stand up here and people just keep chattering and talking, and then sometimes something happens and people just, the silence descends. And so for some reason that happened today without any effort. Try to figure out why that is. So I wanted to just thank all of you for coming. This is our second Justice in Transition New York City breakfast briefing. I'm delighted to have you here and delighted to have our panelists here. So welcome. I want to say a few very quick words about VERA. My name is Nick Turner. I serve as the 5th president of VERA. VERA is a 53-year-old organization, slightly older than me, although I won't tell you how much older than me it is. It's a really remarkable place with a remarkable legacy here in New York City. It's incubated many nonprofits that exist. If you look around the city and look at places like Neighborhood Defender Services and CASES and Safe Horizons, which was once called Victim Services, CEO, these are all places that once started at VERA. And we now work nationally, not just in New York City. We are running a pretrial services program in New Orleans. We work with states all over the country to reduce isolation and segregation. We work to improve domestic violence services for people with disabilities and people who are deaf. And we provide counsel in a pilot program for people who are in deportation proceedings. So the place is really sprawling and tries to reach into all sorts of areas to advance justice and fairness, and it's a thrill for me to be serving as president. I think it's a truly unique place. I often try to think about how to talk about such a big institution in a way that sounds coherent. I would say that after 6 months of being here as president, I haven't quite yet figured out how to do that. But I do think that it is a highly unusual place that in its effort to advance justice and fairness, the thing that really distinguishes us is that we work closely with people in positions of authority, with government leaders like Vinnie Schiraldi, who I see there in the crowd, and Michelle Svierdorf and others, to help them and to help them think and advance efforts that improve the justice system, that improve the delivery of justice. And we do that as a partner. And hopefully what we do is, in our best work, we take knowledge and we use it to transform practice, which ultimately changes people's lives. Really privileged to work with this panel and with those of you in the audience. As I said, there are government leaders who are here. There are people who are leaders of community and justice stakeholders and the like, and folks who run other organizations, like my good friend Greg Berman there in the back, who runs CCI, the Center for Court Innovation. And we're really fortunate also to have Kathleen Horan, who is a reporter from WNYC, who will be leading this discussion and moderating, and Tracy Mears, who is a professor from my alma mater, Yale Law School, and has the great distinction of being wicked smart and also super grounded, something that I would say is a fairly unusual characteristic for someone from Yale Law School. But before I turn things over to Kathleen for introductions, I guess I just want to say a few quick things. I mean, one is to let you know that this is part of a series, and we're going to have 2 more discussions. You can go to our website and learn a bit about them. I think it is next week we're having a conversation about justice in a multicultural city. What does justice mean in a multicultural city, and what is important to whom? What are some of the leading initiatives when we think about that topic? And what's required of city leaders to advance justice in an environment where I think New York is majority minority, and many of the matters that are important to certain communities are special to those communities. So we're going to explore that in some depth. And then in mid-March, we're also going to have our final panel, which looks at the intersection of justice and mental illness. and really what happens to people who are mentally ill when they come into contact with the justice system. Hey, Khalil, you can sit right there on that muffin, which is where I held a seat for you. What happens to people when they come into contact with the justice system, from law enforcement to courts to Rikers? What should we be worried about in this contact? And then also, what do we need to be doing better? And what does the de Blasio administration need to be thinking about in terms of improving services and making sure that people who are in need of services that aren't necessarily criminal justice services can get them? So, like I said, go to our website for details on that. So today's briefing is what we've called Bringing Justice Home, initiatives rooted in community. And the title really reflects our belief here at Vera, and I imagine the belief that everyone in this room has, that the delivery of justice and fairness and the delivery of public safety services is inextricably linked to place. And that when you think about crime and justice and need in communities, you have to think in a fundamentally geographic way. And I can't really even start to have this conversation without thinking about something. When I was at Vera previously, back in the late 1990s and early 2000s, I see Susan Tucker here in the room, some good folks at the Open Society Institute did a lot of thinking about what the geographic stamp was in terms of justice. And I remember you all developing this notion of million-dollar blocks, where the city and the state invested millions of dollars in blocks that were spread throughout New York, but concentrated in very specific communities. But they invested that money not by providing services and the kinds of necessities that communities need, but the investment was largely in the form of the people who were arrested and convicted and then sent up to prison in upstate New York. And they were called million-dollar blocks because when you looked at all of those people who went up there, you saw that millions of dollars were being spent in those places. And the thing that was wonderful about OSI's work was that it tried to turn that on its head and say, look, if we acknowledge that phenomenon, and we try to think about how we want to spend and invest more wisely, is that how we want to do it? And how do we think about reducing that kind of spending and then reinvesting in the communities in a different way? And I think that really speaks in many ways to what our panel is going to talk about today, because I think what we want to really focus on, recognizing the geographic nature of this conversation, is what can the city do? What are people doing right now that is place-based, that is rooted in community, that provides people with the kind of public safety that they need, but also provides people with the services that they need and the supports that they need, recognizing, again, that when you look at matters of crime and justice around the city, they are fundamentally geographic. You can pinpoint in very specific communities and very specific zip codes where the need is greatest. So that's what we're going to explore. So the last thing I want to say is, before I do that, is again, I want to just introduce Kathleen. Kathleen is a reporter for WNYC, and I think that if those of you who listen to WNYC in the mornings when you're getting ready for work, or I wasn't going to say, I would say in some other city, during drive time, but no one here really drives. You would probably hear some of her really important work. I guess it's been since 2006 that she has been covering issues that relate to criminal justice, and recently produced what I would describe as a very heart-wrenching year-long series that profiled every New York child that was killed with a gun. So if you haven't heard that, you should definitely check it out. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Kathleen, who will introduce the rest of our panelists, and thank all of you for coming.
Good morning. I'm happy to be here. We're going to, just to let you know a little bit of how the morning will go, we're going to talk with the panelists. I'm going to talk with the panelists, and they're going to talk with each other. And then at the end, there'll be about 20 minutes or so for questions. So please jot them down. We want to hear from you, and we want to open it up as soon as possible. So just jumping off what Nick just said, even as crime has continued to decline in New York City and elsewhere, there's a growing sense that more can be done, especially in communities where we see the most violent crime, incarceration, and poverty, like those million-dollar blocks Nick was talking about. The mayor's campaign slogan resonated for so many because it's too true, a tale of two cities. We'll be delving into recent initiatives occurring on the neighborhood level that have the potential not only to address crime and recidivism, but also other ongoing big city quality of life issues, homelessness, health, and investment in families. So to meet our panel, we have Tracy Mears, Professor Mears to you. She's the Walton Hale Hamilton Professor at Yale Law School. Her teaching and research interests focus on criminal procedure and criminal law policy with a special focus on empirical investigation of communities, police legitimacy, and legal policy. Clinton Lacey is the Deputy Commissioner for Adult Operations at the New York City Department of Probation. Prior to his recent appointment, he worked in the juvenile and criminal justice field for over 19 years at various organizations, including the Vera Institute, and the W. Hayward Burns Institute, and the Friends of Long Island Academy, to name a few. Abdul Malik is the lead mentor for the South Bronx Arches, which is part of the Young Men's Initiative. It's called a transformative mentoring program. That's right, Abdul, yeah? Yes. And has recently founded a nonprofit organization called FUSED, Families United for Social and Educational Development. And he's a big person in his community. I can vouch for that. It's been a great resource for me. No, way more than size. Margaret, I'm gonna just be bold with your name. Margaret D. Zuriga. Please say it correctly. DeZariga. So I just totally said it wrong. Is the director of the Family Justice Program at the Vera Institute of Justice, where she works with correction departments, juvenile justice agencies, and faith and community-based organizations to support them in adopting family-focused and strength-based approaches to justice reform. So Tracy, jumping off the tale of two cities concept, you've written about places having a life force that's demographic as well as geographic. Is that sort of right? And you said that policies that remove people from their communities can actually foster crime. As we begin to consider localized deterrence, can you explain some of the reasons why crime is often concentrated in certain areas?
Sure. So good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be here at Vera and in New York. This is a great time for us to be getting together to talk about these issues and potential for criminal justice reform. I think in order to do that work, you have to have an understanding of the dynamics of crime in places, as Nick mentioned. It's interesting that people will say things like, New York is a low crime city, Chicago is a high crime city, when the reality is that the phenomenon of crime in cities is not ever citywide. It's never been citywide, and it's always been a situation in which crime is concentrated in cities. And if you look back in the sociology of this, we've known this for a while, but we keep forgetting it, and so it's useful to remind ourselves of this fact. There are some sociologists in the 1920s, Sean McKay, who were trying to resist this idea that the reason why crime was high in certain places, for example, in Chicago was because it was a concentration of people from particular ethnic groups. If you remember Lombroso, who said that we could figure out who would commit crime by measuring knots on people's heads and how long their fingers were and things like this. And Sean McKay thought this was silly, and they started actually looking at the dynamics of crime in place and saw that, look, the same places exhibited high crime rates over time, no matter who lived there. And if that was right, then obviously it couldn't be the Germans or the Italians or the African Americans. It had to be something about the places themselves. But the thing that's interesting, too, is that focusing too much on place can be a little bit distracting as well, because it would suggest that it might be geographical features of the place itself. like buildings or the absence of a park or the presence of a park or something like that, right? It's the combination of place and the ways in which people are organized in that place that tends to support high crime rates over time. So let me just run through this idea just so that we get the pieces of it. First, you look at a characteristic of a place, and you can see that places that exhibit high crime rates over time often are characterized by lots of residential mobility, high rates of poverty, high rates of low educational attainment, high rates of what was called back then, we call it something different, family disruption. That was the fancy name for high rates of families headed by single parents. And so that causes people to think that those things themselves lead to crime, but it turns out, at least in space, that those characteristics of places are modulated by characteristics of the community itself. So what do I mean by that? Norms of commitment to supervision of teen peer groups in space, the commitment to guardianship of the place you live in, participation in local organizations, churches, think Robert Putnam, bowling leagues and the like. And if you have those things, which are community characteristics really, it's not just that particular people have to do them, but if enough of that happens in a place, then it actually changes the likelihood that you'll have high crime rates, so that the fact that there's poverty and low educational attainment and the like does not inevitably mean high crime rates. So going back to what Kathleen was saying, if you focus on just individual, predilections to commit crime, then you miss that middle part, right? And so you think, well, I'm going to attack crime by changing an individual's calculus about whether or not they're going to commit a crime. This is the idea that a person will commit a crime if the benefits of doing that, are greater than the costs of not, are greater than the cost of doing it, which would be going to prison. And that's what we've done. That's the $1 million block idea. Let's go in and arrest lots of people, send lots of people to prison, so on and so forth. But when you do that, and if you can imagine on this beautiful purple background, the flow I was telling you about, the characteristics, individual characteristics on that side, the characteristics of the community in the middle, crime here. If you attack crime by thinking about it as an individual level phenomenon, what are you going to do? You're going to take lots of people out of a space. And they're concentrated because they all live there, right? And what are you going to do? You're going to enhance residential mobility because you're taking people out and they're moving, right? You're going to enhance family disruption because you're going to break up families. You're probably going to impact low educational attainment. My colleague, Chris Wildeman, who's worked with Margaret, will tell you that you're going to impact the health of children who are in these families. And all of that, of course, is going to affect the middle box, the extent to which people are committed to guardianship, supervision of teen peer groups, and the like, which itself leads to crime. What does this mean? That the standard approach to criminal justice, crime reduction, by focusing on individuals, is itself criminogenic, right? So the answer is, I think, to target your criminal justice policies not at the individual and think about the individual as separated from his or her environment and people, but instead think about ways in which you can enhance that middle box, the community characteristics, the social organization of the community itself. And I'm sure we're going to hear more about how that's done in particular places by our panelists, but that's the theory, right, about why it works.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you talk a little bit more about that, looking at the intervention program that you helped start in Chicago, working with ex-offenders, and about how, about this different approach?
Yeah, so one way of thinking about how that approach that I've done in Chicago, and actually we're replicating here in 5 sites in New York, in Harlem, in Brownsville, in the Bronx, Schenectady, and Albany. Here in New York, I'm at New York State. I know you guys only focus on the city, but there are other places too. And then I've worked with actually Clinton and Abdul on a juvenile version of this. takes into account not only the organization of communities, which, if you want to think about it structurally, that's thinking about what's like highways. How people are connected to each other is a highway. And then you want to think about what norms travel on those highways. So we want to change the normative landscape by changing the norms that are traveling on these highways that connect people. What I like to do is try to substitute a different way of thinking about compliance. So the standard model is to say that people obey the law because they fear the consequences of failing to do so. And if you believe that, then what you will do is try to raise the price of crime, right? By arresting a lot of people, putting people in prison for a long time, so on and so forth. Social psychology tells us that while deterrence is a reason why people comply, it's not the most powerful reason. Most people comply with the law because either they think it's the right thing to do, and that the law happens to be consistent with their moral schedule, or because they think that government has the right to dictate to them proper behavior. That's police legitimacy, legal legitimacy, and so on. And there are actual ways I'm going to make this quick. I know I'm probably going over time. There are ways to enhance that. And that's what we've done in Chicago, and I'm sure Clinton can tell you about how we've done it here. But you actually call people in and you talk to them about the importance of complying with the law, but you talk to them in a way that is consistent with connecting them to seeing government in a more positive light. I mean, that's the short version, and I can say more later.
It's a good segue to talking to Clint about another kind of altered approach to law enforcement. At the end of October of last year, there were more than 23,000 people on probation. For those of you that didn't know, in supervision in New York City. And not long ago, that meant heading to a centralized location that would be a long trek from home or work, likely. So a person who lived in Harlem would be required to report to a central office in Lower Manhattan, and the supports that a probationer needed to succeed were likely rooted back home in Harlem and probably unfamiliar to his or her probation officer. To address that, in 2010, the Department of Probation embarked on an initiative called the Neighborhood Opportunity Network, or NEON, that embeds probation offices and related services in, can you believe it, communities. We want to hear about more about these NEONs and what changes you've seen so far, if any, in recidivism rates.
Yes, thank you. And thank you. I'm very happy to be here this morning to be a part of this conversation with the distinguished audience and panel. Happy to be back at Vera again. And I think you're right, it definitely was an excellent segue into a conversation about some of the things that we've tried to do at probation, the NEON, Neighborhood Opportunity Network in particular. I did, if I may, want to just digress for one moment to share a thought that I had in preparing for this morning's conversation. And that really was a thought I think that I continue to carry with me. It was over 20 years ago that I sort of stumbled upon an article. I had just begun working with young people leaving Rikers Island, and I stumbled upon an article that talked about the work of Eddie Ellis and other of his associates who had served long terms in prison, who had begun to engage in the study and analysis of what they began to or joined in terming the prison industrial complex. And they did an analysis of who were the populations, where were the areas of concentration that were feeding Rikers Island and feeding the rest of the state in terms of the state prison systems. And of course, that article talked about their work and talked about the fact that there were basically 7 neighborhoods that accounted for the overwhelming majority of the city's incarcerated population at Rikers Island and what have you, and then also a huge majority of those who constituted the population throughout the state prison. So it was really compelling. And I think that it was, in some ways, a precursor to the work of Eric Cadora in the $1 Million Blocks, right? And also a contributor to what is, I think, still hopefully a growing movement, if I may use that term, of justice reinvestment, of an analysis of concentrations of populations who are feeding the criminal justice system. So that was compelling in and of itself. But what was also really, I think, very important and something that remains critical to this conversation today and really at the heart of our thinking at probation in terms of the rollout of the NEON is that who were those populations? Yes, you talked about where they were in the Brownsville, East New York, Harlem, the South Bronx, South Jamaica, at that point the Lower East Side, you know. There's been somewhat shifting of the population, but not very much at all. A bit of gentrification in some places, but still the core neighborhoods exist and remain the core ones. But who were the people there? They were by and large Black and brown and male and young and living in poverty and suffering the disparities of education and healthcare and housing and the various issues that we know fill the list of challenges facing those communities. And so I thought about that because I think that the work of Eddie Ellis, the work of Eric Cadoran, the work of justice reinvestment really is at the heart of the conversation that we're having and that we had at probation and thinking about a NEON, a neighborhood opportunity network, and thinking about in what way could we reinvest through a probation lens, a relatively limited lens in the scheme of things, but still an important one. How could we invest in communities and begin to change the paradigm and have a different definition of ourselves as a probation department and a different definition of our clients, those who we were there to serve. So I was actually really intrigued by the beginning of this conversation when you mentioned the tale of two cities. I think it's a very appropriate context. Of course, the tale of two cities is it's the best of times and the worst of times, right? It's the haves and the have-nots. It's inequality, for sure. But beyond that, deeper than that, it's inequity. It's a disparity, right? It's unfairness by definition. It's flawed and often failed approaches to working with the population, as Tracy just described. It can become, our policies and practices can themselves become criminogenic and feeding the problem. And so it really cries out then, the context of the tale of two cities and all that it represents, cries out for an investment in local communities, right? It cries out for a reform of policies and practices. It cries out for community engagement.
But for government to do that, that's a big leap for probation office to be in a neighborhood for basically make house calls.
Right.
In a sense, that's a big leap. So how has that been working? How does that work?
Well, the way it worked, it was in the context of a series of reforms then that the department started to undertake, right? Drastically cutting nearly in half the violation of probation rate, emphasizing the elimination or the decreasing of the barriers that were facing our clients because they had felonies and what have you, emphasizing services, resources, and opportunities. And so by emphasizing services and resources and opportunities, it logically brought us to the local communities where people live, right? So yes, the NEON certainly is a place. It is a hub. It is a place where we have redeployed probation staff to work out of and engage with their clients in those same local communities. But it's also a way of working. It's not just moving our offices. It's coming into a community, reintroducing ourselves, or perhaps for the first time introducing ourselves to these local communities, to say that we want to partner with those on probation, their families, and their neighborhoods. And yes, helping our clients to be successful, to be law-abiding, to connect to services and resources. But it's also about reaching out and partnering with the wider community. And so the NEON then is a place where we don't just serve our clients, which is a mouthful in a different way. Mm-hmm. We, as opposed to previous thoughts and policies, instead of trying to keep not allowing family to come to our spaces. We encourage family. We encourage partners. We want to build in circles of support as we develop individualized plans for each of our clients, for sure. So there's a great amount of work that goes into how we want to serve our clients in their own neighborhoods, right? Because they will, by and large, continue to live there. We want to connect them, build relationships between them and not just service providers, but service providers for sure, but with residents, with neighborhood-based organizations, with business people, with local law enforcement.
It's my understanding that reading some of the materials about neon or neons, can you plural? Is it plural or is it singular?
Yeah, I'm sure you can.
These are big ideas.
We're still working on it.
Is that it's not just about serving the client, it's about serving the community, that it's this, dare I say, more holistic.
Yeah, I think, and it's really interesting, and Tracy spoke to that, right? And our Commissioner, Vinny Shirali, and I often talk about it, and all of us, Susan, who was there as we were birthing this neon, talk about the community as our client. Right? So we have our individual 23,000 clients who have various risk levels and various individualized plans, right? Various issues that we want to address to help them on their course through life. But the community is our client in a larger sense. And so then we're not just working on individual people on probation. We're reaching out to the community to build resources that will serve our clients, but that will serve the community itself. So the neons now have become community centers, have become hubs where people who aren't on probation can come in and receive various types of services, from education to information about healthcare, to being connected to various other types of opportunities and services. And we think, though, while there's this larger value, I think, of engaging community and getting community to be a part and a partner of justice, not just a recipient of it, right? To make it a two-way street. We think that that's hugely important. We also think that by doing that, it serves the further development and wellness of the community, and of course that serves to impact our 23,000 clients as well.
Well, I think it makes sense to speak to you now, Abdul, because you have firsthand experience with probation itself. Having been on probation, fathering a son who is he currently on probation?
No.
Not anymore, but recently. And you're a mentor in the community, and you work with young people who are going through the system themselves. So can you share some of your personal experiences with this whole system that we're talking about and how that informs the work that you do?
So I was formerly on probation. I also was on parole, so I had to, experience both. So more so on probation because I was on probation twice. So I got on probation, then went upstate, came home on parole, finished parole, still engaging in the activities in the community, and wound up back on probation again. I want to say I was an ideal client of probation. The second time on probation, I paid attention to some of the stipulations that was in place. I think I was a little bit disciplined from my previous experiences being on parole. So going back to probation, it was kind of easy to maneuver, but still paying attention to what they expected of me on probation. So the neon in the Bronx was the probation officer that I used to attend, had to go physically in the building and meet a probation officer. So it was very, very you just had to be compliant. There was no real investment.
You're talking about the before
yes,
the neon.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there was no investment in trying to help me move forward. I had to do everything on my own and really just comply to what the stipulations that was set for me. And that was to seek and maintain employment, keep my curfew, no connection to any criminality in the community, which was just not a reality. Everybody that I was around, that I grew up with, was involved in some form or some fashion involved in criminality. So it was difficult for me to even maintain relationships because I could possibly get picked up if my probation officer saw me in the community involved in someone that was on probation or parole. So it was just, I want to say, a hot mess, for me. So trying to figure out how to maintain, but I was older and I was able to maneuver through parole successfully. So I just had to make do and do what I needed to do. I'm gonna bring it 10 years later, and now I'm walking into Neon for the first time, and they're cutting the ribbon with the mayor, the former mayor Bloomberg, and his staff was there opening up the Neon, and I had the privilege of being hired to become a credible messenger by an organization, the Bronx Clergy Criminal Justice Roundtable, and I was invited to come and be a part of this initiative. And walking into probation, okay, first of all, I seen colors, I seen pictures, I saw computers, and I'm standing there, I'm like, okay, this is a bunch of smoke and mirrors. This is just another way, keep the young people coming in, intelligence, get what they need from the community, and boom, send us back out. And and I swear, I always tell the story. I was one of the people that came in there really to come back to the community, say, this place is. Don't go there, just go there, do what you gotta do. Don't speak to anybody, be quiet, answer the questions, get out of there. But being engaged and being able to engage the probation officers on a different level, having conversations with them and seeing the young people. So I was able to see these young people and they were able to see me, and they had to kind of figure out who I was, and I'm trying to figure out what they're doing. I already know the communities. I'm a resident of the Bronx all my life, so I was very familiar with the different neighborhoods, the different concepts, the violence, the gang, the historical piece about the gangs and the different projects, and really just understanding what these young people were going through.
What else changed? So you were definitely skeptical about
Absolutely.
the neon. What else changed your mind about them? Obviously, they look different for people that don't know. That they look less like a government office and more like, I guess you could say, a place you'd want to be. I think there's been a lot of effort in making them, as you say, colorful and lively and interesting. And but what else changed your mind?
Well, it was really just, it came down to one particular incident. It was a young man that I was working with, and he had not been going to probation. And when he wasn't going to probation, he was nervous, came to the program. He was coming to Arches, he was sitting with me, he was like, listen, I think I'm gonna be violated. And I'm like, what you gonna be violated for? He said, well, I haven't been going to, probation. I said, when the last, we had a conversation when the last time you'd gone to probation, it had been some time. And I was like, well, let me test this new concept and go back and kind of advocate for this young person on probation. So I go into the probation office and I seek out this probation officer. We sit down, we have a conversation. I go to supervision and then up the chain, and they're like, we're not going to violate this young person if you get him to come in. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, there's two things. I'm looking at it two ways. One, if I bring this kid in and he gets violated, I'm a rat. Real simple. My credibility is shot in the community, and if it turns around and works, then this young person gets a second shot. Now I have more credibility to go back to community and move this agenda with these young people who I see all the time in the community that's on probation but just living life on life's terms. So long story short, we was able to negotiate. I was able to advocate, negotiate this young person not being violated, showing up to probation, getting him back on track. He wound up graduating Arches a year later. He's right now on his way to graduating high school, he's on his way to college. He spoke a couple of months ago down at probation in City Hall to speak on this process, and he's like my adopted son. So it was real. From that point on, the floodgates opened. I was able to really just start maneuvering and creating relationships that would be used for these young people. And I think the physical piece was that the young people got to see me and other people like me in probation, who they know from the community, like, what are you, a cop now? And being able to combat that, saying, no, I'm not a cop. I work with, I have an opportunity to work with some of these probation officers that you guys are dealing with. Let's sit down and talk and see how we can navigate through this and keep you on probation and becoming successful in the community.
So it was a resource. It wasn't just, it was more than just somewhere you have to go and check in and kind of jump through the hoops. That it was actually.
Well, I think initially for me, it was never a resource. We don't, particularly from the community, I'm not using probation as a resource. I didn't do that. And I think what it started when I was able to take these young people in there and sit down with them and their probation officer, it was a relief. Like, they can go and say, okay, I'm not gonna, that anxiety about going back to jail or being violated sets forth another level of criminality, because now they're like, I don't care. So whatever, I'm gonna do whatever, as opposed to trying to rectify the mistake, right? And then I think once they saw that, some of the young people who believe, not all of them, but some of them that believed that this worked, were able to move forward and say, well, this work, Abdul, I could trust you, so what's the next step? and then we was able to move forward.
So, and further on with some new approaches and community approaches, Margaret, you had a program at Vera called Family Justice. You've been working with the New York City Housing Authority, the Department of Homeless Services, and the Corporation for Supportive Housing on a program to allow former offenders to return to public housing. Recent state data shows that 19% of people released from prison listed a shelter as their home address or their main address that they're going to be going to. Can you tell us about the link between family and staying out of prison and about this pilot program with NYCHA?
Sure. So I think it's really exciting to finally be able to talk about this program. It's been a couple years in the making, and it's great to be here with so many of our partners on the project, from the Osborne Association, Center for Court Innovation, the Young Men's Initiative, and certainly NYCHA, who we couldn't do this without. So we really, the program was really built on what we know from the research about the link between family and successful reentry. And we know that most people are going to rely on their families for housing support when they come out of prison. Not only do families provide the kind of emotional support, like mentors can provide, but they also can provide the really tangible resources, housing, food, clothes, and those kinds of things. And for a large number of people, and we don't know exactly how many, though we intend to learn through this program, for a large number of people, returning home to family may mean returning home to public housing. And most housing authorities across the country have a lot of discretion over who they're allowed to let into public housing. So that's the good news, is that there is a lot of local discretion for each housing authority to kind of think differently about access to housing. And here in New York City, we had this sort of golden opportunity with the Young Men's Initiative and the chairman at the time, John Rea of NYCHA, to explore whether we could help support the return home of 150 people back into public housing. And so the idea for the pilot is that those folks are identified by the community organizations who have the trust of their clients and who can really talk frankly about many questions that people may have about whether they can return to NYCHA. Is this program legitimate? Those kinds of things have come up. And then provide the kind of case management resources to help them move back in with their families, make that reentry transition. And then NYCHA is unique amongst housing authorities in that they have a family services department. So they actually have staff who can provide support to families if families are interested in any kind of supportive services as well.
How does that work? I've been to a lot of NYCHA buildings. I haven't, come across a lot of those services. How do they work?
Well, the way that it's working for this pilot is that there are going to be dedicated staff at NYCHA who work with the families who are involved in the pilot, so that those staff can be, sort of more informed about reentry issues, be knowledgeable about all the different nonprofit providers who are partners in the pilot, some of whom are already very family focused in their services, others may be less so. And so then NYCHA can really help connect families who are interested to, the range of resources that NYCHA has to offer around job training programs and other things, but also potentially other city resources or other nonprofits who can provide those kinds of supports.
And what have you seen in terms of the family link to recidivism and how that works, or how they're linked, if at all?
So there have been some studies done around visitation while people are incarcerated, and we certainly see that people who get more frequent visits and get visits from a broader range of people tend to do better post-release. Interestingly, this one study out of the Minnesota Department of Corrections found that, if certain kinds of people were visiting you, that had sort of a beneficial impact. If your ex-wife was visiting, it was less beneficial. So there have been those kinds of studies, and then I think, there's sort of this sort of inextricable link between returning home to family, getting all the kinds of supports that families provide, and that has positive benefits for recidivism, for reduced drug use, for obtaining and retaining employment. And, no one study has been able to kind of tease those out to see, what matters more. And as the Family Justice Program, we would argue, you don't even worry about it, like just do it all, because the family can provide such foundational support.
Why a 2-year pilot program? Was that just like, it's good to have a chunk of time? Was there a thought behind that, or?
Well, I think, we're doing something that hasn't been done before. So there's a number of reasons for that. I think NYCHA walked into this very eager to have an evaluation, which Vera is involved with, so that we can all learn together who's going to be successful in this program, what kinds of supports are going to be most helpful. We're going to be interviewing program participants to find out from their perspective, what works, what doesn't work, from the family's perspective. So the 2 years gives us a chance to really implement the program, to improve on it as we go, and then to sort of figure out what the best way is to get the referral flow going and all of those kinds of things. So it's a long enough period of time that I think people believe that this is an available opportunity for a while, but then also it's time limited, so that if we're learning things that are worrisome, we can address those right away.
Is there anyone on the panel who have questions for each other? We want to open this up a little bit.
So I think what you've heard in every single case is an example of the ways in which you can actually improve the ways communities are organized, which would support rather than undermine the goal of reducing crime. So Margaret said, look, we're trying to get people who are coming out of prison connected back with their families. That's obviously directed exactly at reducing family disruption, which is one of those big factors we're worried about. Clinton, I'm going to save you for last. Clinton says, well, look, what we want to do is make sure that the neons are not only addressing the individual people on probation, but make sure that not only those people, but their families become more connected in the communities. And you said something really important. You were saying we want them to, start businesses, visit businesses, become more involved in organizations in the community, and that NEON is going to be a place. In fact, it is an organization itself that not just people who are on probation, but their families can participate in. That's creating these important connections among people, this structure that you can have these pro-social norms taking place. So that's exactly consistent with the theory, while making sure that people aren't going back to prison, right? We're not violating people. So, and then Abdul says, we're going to actually change the vision that people have of this important unit of the state in their lives, right? Now, that's all about the legitimacy idea. So I wanted to just review that really quickly. I said that you could think about people complying with the law because they fear the consequences of failing to do so. On the one hand, that's deterrence, that's sending people back to prison. Or you could try to enhance the idea that people will obey because they think government has the right to dictate to them proper behavior. How do you do that? Well, there are different factors that people care about. One really important one is that they want to see that legal authorities treat them with dignity and respect. That's the most important factor by far. Another important factor is that they want to see that the decisions that people in legal authority are making are fair, that they are factually based, that a person in Abdul's position back when he was on probation won't say, you're just choosing me because I live here, or because I'm a black man, or because of some other reason. But it's very clear to him, transparent about why a decision is taking place, which is why we do the forums that we've been doing. We explain to people what's going to happen. But a third really, really important factor is people want to have an expectation that they will be treated benevolently by this legal authority in the future. And the only way you can do that is actually change the nature of the relationship and make the NEON, for example, a place that people want to be, right? You're actually showing people that the state is not holding you at arm's length, but actually saying, you're part of the community, we're part of the community with you, we are here to help you, and and not to denigrate you and push you away. So you actually are seeing this theory play out on the ground, and I wouldn't be surprised if data showed that you're getting lower rates of recidivism. I know my data shows that for my programs.
Nice.
Thanks.
Just wrapped it all up in a bow. Yeah, I would just wanted to jump off of what you were saying about Eddie Ellis. He's written before that he doesn't like to use the term reentry because for many people that were incarcerated, they were never really even a part of their community. So you can't really reenter something you were never belonging to before. And so it sounds like for a lot of these things that we're talking about, it's sort of trying to make that a reality as opposed to feeling so marginal and so outside that you don't want to play by the rules.
That plays out on an individual basis, of course, when we talk about connecting our clients in their own local communities. You know, it's kind of interesting what you said. It reminds me of even the term, restorative justice. Sometimes we're not restoring relationships, but we're creating them, right? And that's a lot of what this work is, creating the space, the safe space and the opportunity, and then the resources, okay? The investment that has to go into this work to make it viable. So on that level, on the individual level, that's certainly a part of the work. But then the communities themselves are marginalized, right? So it's about restoring and creating, I would say, it particularly applies here, a new relationship, as Tracy and as others have described, between the communities and the government and the criminal justice system in this sense. And that's what I was speaking to previously in terms of participatory type of justice, a two-way street. And so part of what the NEON seeks to do is to engage community for sure. And let me talk more specifically, right? So it's not just abstract. We've created what we're calling now NEON stakeholder groups. So we have 7 NEONs, 7 community hub NEONs in the city. And so for each of them, we've created what we call NEON stakeholder groups, which are basically committees or groupings of local citizens who are young people, who are parents, who are people on probation, who are local elected officials, educators, law enforcement, business people. We're not finished. Not all of the NEON stakeholder groups have the same exact proportions of representation, but the idea is to get local residents to own the NEON, to own a piece of this work, right? So that it's theirs, right? It's not just probation's, right? And so what the purpose of this, particularly the NEON stakeholder groups, which I think speaks to the larger idea, is from these groups to gather them to receive feedback on what we're doing, advice on what we should do, but not just feedback and advice, participation. And in fact, I think the next level, which we've begun to scratch the surface on, is shared decision making, which is maybe a euphemism for power sharing, which perhaps sounds a little bit more provocative. But the idea is that local residents own a piece of what we're doing. Yes, we are empowered. Our officers are peace officers. We have responsibilities. We have badges. Some have guns, right? There's this power of the state, for sure. How can we reach out and engage the community in a way and share some of that responsibility and power that creates this new relationship where they have a voice in what we do, in our actual policy, in our practice? And then, of course, in our outcomes, which are geared towards not just, again, successful probation terms, but geared towards contributing to community wellness. And so that's I think, the larger vision of the NEON, is that type of shared power. And so community engagement is really about community empowerment, I think.
That makes sense. Just before we open it up to the audience, Abdul, do you want to just, I almost feel the gears in your brain working. Maybe I'm projecting, but
so I'm gonna speak to one piece that we spoke about with the house calls. You had a statement about house calls, about probation. I don't know. I wanted to really just question what did that mean, because at the end of the day, they always make house calls. That was part of the, what probation officer did, come in your house, right?
More like parachuting in versus kind of just being there.
Oh no, they still parachute in. It doesn't change. But at the end of it, but I think one thing I wanted to say about the process that I've become a part of is that when you're able to. A couple of nights ago, I'm in the barbershop, right? So I'm in the barbershop, I'm sitting here, and a couple of young people walk into the barbershop, and they've graduated a young men's program that I had the privilege of running with some of the probation officers at at Neon, sorry. And a couple of them come in, and I'm in the chair, and they start talking. And he's one of our young people that graduated the process. It was a 3-month process that wound up turning into 9 months, right? Because as we saw, it was a pilot piece, the male talk in the Bronx Neon, and as we started to see that these young men, we were working with these young guys, that they needed more than just 90 days, to sit there and kind of open up and start talking to us about certain things or creating those relationships, right? So it took time to massage it, and to see one of my young people come in. I was in the barbershop getting my hair cut. He walks in. He was like, "Abdul." I was like, "What's up, Malik?" So we sitting there, we talk, and he's in the barbershop, right? And he's saying to me, "I got a job. I'm working in Foot Locker. Just got home, about to go home, get my rest, whatever." And I'm sitting there, and I'm like, you graduated a couple of months ago, and before that, you was talking about push came to shove. A conversation happened in the group that he was describing his way of dealing with justice in the community. He was like, if something happens, I'm gonna go to an extreme left. I'm gonna deal with it, and I'm gonna deal with the consequences when it comes my way, right? So here he is coming, and I hadn't seen him since his graduation. I was, passing, saying hello. So he comes, and we sitting there, I'm in the chair, and we talking, and he's telling me I got a job. I said, "What's up with school?" "That's all right." He was always the young man that wasn't really about school, but he's in school. And he hadn't been rearrested in, I want to say a year now, right? Because he started with us, and then 9 months, and then a couple of months later, and he hasn't been rearrested. So I'm looking at him, I was like, "So what's up?" He's like, I made a mistake. He had got, up until I saw him a couple of days ago, he hadn't been rearrested to what I understood, but then he came and he told me that he got into something else, right? But he's dealing with it like a man. So he's not running from it, he's addressing it. He said, "I made a mistake." He was honest, which blew my mind, because in the beginning, this kid was probably he sat in the back, he didn't really speak too much, he signed in. And I used to ask him, "Why do you come to group?" And he was like, "Oh, my probation officer said I had to come." I was like, "No, he didn't. Your PO didn't tell you that, because this is a voluntary group, so stop." But he was coming, right? And so and then he was telling me what was going on, and he was like, "I'm gonna get through this, and I'm just come back. If you need help, come sit down and talk to me. You can find me in probation. He can find me in the community, and let's just sit down and work through whatever he was going through." And I think that was the major piece that really, for me, that connects me to the Neon process, is the fact that, to face time in probation in the building, physically in the building, and even some cases in the court, because I've had the privilege of going to courts and working with some of these young people, advocating for them in courts in front of some certain judges, that these kids see us constantly, right? And then now they know they have a resource in the community. And it's not a resource that, "Oh, watch out for Abdul, he's a rat, he works with the cops." No, it's more like, "No, I could go to him because he's gonna help me figure this out." And that is, I think, the piece that really, changed my whole belief in the process that it will work. And when you talk about Neon has, probation has this umbrella, right, over the Neons, right? So just look at this picture. And now they're becoming a smaller part of what the Neon is, the community center, right? Because now Neon is a community center. It's not just probation, but a community, and they're just a part of the larger picture, as opposed to being in control and coming in there with this punitive, if you violate, you're gonna go back to jail. We're gonna put you back in front of a judge. But now the kids is walking in there. I'm sending kids there to go to GED programs that are not on probation. They said, "Well, I can't go. That's probation." No, you can go there. As a matter of fact, go there, because if you go there, your partner's gonna go there, and your partner's on probation. So guess what? You and your boy could go sit here Monday through Thursday, get your GED done. I'll see you in probation, because I'm gonna slide through and I'm gonna check on you. And at the end of the day, your partner doesn't have to report to a PO every week. That makes sense. It's easy. Exactly. It becomes easier to get it done, right? And then whatever's going on, we can kind of figure out what the next steps are going to be. I like the business piece. I always say to my, I don't really push the business too much about knowing the business partners, only because I'm saying to my young people, you got to finish school first. That's the first thing we need to work on. Let's get your education, because you can get a job now, and then once the job is over, what are you going to do next? So my thing has always been, let's just get our education first. Let's work on that because I don't know if you know the acronym job is just over broke. So that's what just over broke a job. Get it? Oh, okay. So kind of that's what we kind of try to push our young people from being because they get these jobs, get a little bit of money. I mean, I've seen some of these kids get jobs and they're so proud of themselves just from being in summer youth. Like they clean up nicely. They're walking in there strutting, having that, that peacock strut, and then I'm like, but a couple of months ago, you was running around here with the hoodie on and talking about if somebody steps to me, I'm gonna deal with it. But now, you see a light at the end of a tunnel, and this is coming into probation doing that. So
I think that's a good point to open it up to the audience. If anyone wants to ask a question, make a comment, we'd love to open this conversation up. If you could just raise your hand and say who you are before you...
Good morning, everybody. I'm Stephen Wasserman. I'm with the Legal Aid Society Criminal Practice. My question for Margaret is, first of all, are all 150 places in that program already filled? And if so, is there any prospect that the program will be expanded to include the many hundreds of NYCHA residents who have been banned and who are separated from their families because of felony drug arrests, who have not necessarily gone to prison or jail?
Good question. So we have not filled the program. So if anyone knows anyone who's interested, we've put some papers out at the front desk with some contact information. We just opened up enrollment in the fall, so it's been sort of a slow, steady build. And the idea with the the 2-year time frame and then the evaluation is really to learn what we can from the program and how it's working. And then the plan is that NYCHA will use that information to inform whether it wants to make any broader changes to admissions policies. So the program is really designed for people who are within 18 months of release from either prison or jail or juvenile facility, anyone 16 and up. So we haven't quite gotten to that broader group that you're mentioning, but we have to start somewhere.
I'm sorry, just a little follow-up.
Oh, sure. Can you just wait for the mic?
I'm sorry. Are you working with that NYCHA tribunal that decides who can move back in and who can't?
Have you represented people on that tribunal
Well,
before?
we have hundreds of clients who were separated from their families.
I don't know, Nora, if you want to respond to any of that from the NYCHA perspective.
Can you just say who you are?
Yes, hi, I'm Nora Racing. I'm the Director of Family Services at NYCHA. So can you elaborate on that question? I'm not really clear on what you're asking.
No, I mean, I'm talking about the trespass notice program. I'm talking about the ban on residents who have been subjected to felony drug arrest. And just the question is whether the family justice program or something like it could be used to try to assuage some of the effects of these arrests on families.
Well, I think that as Margaret pointed out, the family reentry pilot is hopefully something that's going to inform us on some of these broader issues regarding trespass policy, standards of admission, permanent exclusions that we currently put in place through our internal administrative hearing process. So we really are hoping, and that's why the partnership with Vera is such an important partnership, that the evaluation piece to the pilot will assist us in, perhaps making some additional changes to these other areas.
Very good. Glad you have an open mind about it.
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Hi, this is a question for Professor Mears. I remember thinking when Manhattan was thinking about setting up these forums, that maybe it would be a little different than Chicago, because I felt like the trust that people have in our police department is maybe a little bit more broken than it was in Chicago. And I just wonder if you've noticed a difference between the Chicago forums and the Manhattan ones on that score.
I guess I could say, I've participated or I've observed many of the Chicago ones, and I have observed every single one of the forums in New York except for the ones in Albany and Schenectady. So, and one of the things that I've been really struck by here is the commitment of the organizers of the New York forums to be really serious about the tone of the message. So, I've talked a lot so far about, the ways in which you want to set it up in a certain way, what you need to communicate. But it's also important to understand that it's not just saying certain things, but you have to say it in a certain way. There's an architecture of the room that's important. We don't have a lot of time, so if people are interested, I can send you research briefs that I've done for the White House on this, just 4 pages. But how the room is set up is really important. The tone is really important. So, when I'm telling the folks about how to do it, you want to avoid shark music. So you can imagine a picture of a picture of a beach, and what do you guys see? You see something happy and a place you want to be, and then I play the theme from Jaws, and then you don't want to be there, and then I play the theme from Paco Bell, and then you do want to be there, right? So there's ways in which you can enhance that. People in New York are really committed to that. The role of the police here is different. It's much more centralized, and so even when you have local police who will say to the participants in the room, I am your police commander, it's my job to keep you safe, so on and so forth, it's a bigger lift to get people who are listening to believe that, given what's happening down at Central, let's say. But again, just as Mayor de Blasio mentioned in his inaugural remarks, there's a new opportunity here, and I think my research has shown that one of the things that's surprising is when people are actually treated with dignity and respect by people in legal authority that they don't expect. That is, when it has been really bad, and they have an opportunity to participate in a structure that's actually quite positive. It yields bigger benefits sometimes than you would otherwise expect, right?
And are you saying that it's easier to restore trust than maybe you would think it is?
That's a shorthand way of saying it. I mean, another way of saying it is when I'm dealing with a police officer, I expect that person to treat me with respect. I'm Professor Mears, right? You better treat me with respect, right? And the expectation of a lot of the people that are participating in this forum is that they will not be treated with respect ever. And so when there is this one opportunity where someone says, I am here for you, and they've never been there for them, then it's very, very powerful, actually. And I actually think that that's one of the reasons why we have the results that we've had in Chicago. We've got 10 years of very positive results, and our initial results in New York are promising, although someone's going to ask me about specific numbers, and I can't give it to you. I can just say that we're feeling good about where we are.
Who else has right over here? Well, we had one and then one. Doesn't matter the order.
Good morning. My name is Christian Claudio. I'm one of the newly appointed residential care advocates with HCS, meaning that we've been assigned to oversee all the NSP and the LSP facilities in New York, all of New York, meaning the 5 boroughs.
Can you say what those stand for?
Non-secure placement facility and limited secure placement facility. So, listening to you guys, I know that one of the main factors in helping to make a successful reentry for, like in my case, the juveniles back into the family structure is engaging the parents. And one of the things that are going to be a challenge for us is engaging the difficult parents that have been difficult to engage in the past, especially when we find that the problem may be in the home with the parents. So that being a challenge, maybe, with you guys, or what some of the things that you may be experiencing, just curious on what do you do to deal with something like that?
So I do. So we, from different perspectives, we work with the families. Like I work with 2 different. I have my organization Fused and then Arches. So one of the things I do with my colleagues is we go in a home, we do home visits, and we work with the parents, and we try to offer to get them services that's necessary for them to deal with a young person returning home, right? Because a young person being taken away from home is like, okay, the problem is only temporarily fixed because the home gets, calm. This young person who's creating all the havoc and tension in the home is out of the home right now, right? But the parents never get the services they need to prepare for the young person to come home or address them, or when they come home, how are they going to be able to help that young person get back into school? Because they have a problem with, they had a problem with the school that the young person was going to, so now they have this whole idea how to go back. They're going to be adversarial going into the schools to try to get their child back into a positive environment. The transitional piece that's not in place when a young person is returning home to go to school. So we try to help them on every level, right? From getting them services to having outlets for them to be able to talk about certain things. We've done going as far as giving parents nights out. Like if I'm working with a young person, we've given, movie tickets at dinner, vouchers to go out to dinner. Just go out and have a good time and don't worry about this young person right now, because parents seem to get locked in to this frustration and don't have an opportunity to kind of just let go. They're always on their guard, right? And then when the young person comes home, I like to say we call it a high touch. And that's really just being with this young person all the way through whatever they're going to until they're able to go out on their own and do some of these things positively. They're gonna make mistakes, and that's I think the best part about us is knowing that they're gonna still make mistakes, right? But as long as they can be honest about it and continue to work to do the right thing, then we're gonna work with them until they're able to say, you know what, I'm ready to go out on my own. So it's just really about putting ourselves in position to help the families too. So.
Hey, I'm Frank Kruglander. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I work on a televisiting program that connects children and teenagers with their incarcerated parents, and also connecting other community resources into their correctional facilities. And I'm so impressed with the NEON model of changing the meta things in the community and creating this center, this community center. I'm wondering how you go about two things that I would see as challenges and opportunities. One is, how do you develop those relationships with the organization, the existing infrastructure in the community, like the local community center that's already there, or the barbershop that's already there, these internal dynamics? How do you build those relationships? And then how do you build the trust relationships with the people like Abdul was talking about, with the young people or the individual people who are involved in supervision? I'm curious, what are the signals you're sending out that are working?
Do you mean also because people in the community would be reticent to have
Yes.
people from immigration and...
Yeah, a combination of things. To be sure, a huge challenge, an ongoing challenge, right? The local communities have had a history and I think plenty of substance and reason and experience to be distrustful, to be antagonistic, right? Of government in general and of law enforcement in particular. And so that speaks back to when I referenced the kind of introducing ourselves or reintroducing ourselves to the community. Really a prerequisite for that, though, was, and a huge challenge, was and is training staff, a culture change within the agency. People have been, there's about a 15 to 20 year average tenure at probation. People have been there a long time. That's never been in their job description, particularly. Now, POs of different stripes, some will be much more community focused than others. Some are very invested in local communities. So it's not to paint with a brushstroke that probation never engage community, right? But it was never a part of the way we defined our business, that it is our job, it is a part of your role as a PO and as a department to go out and to build these types of relationships with non-traditional partners, not just with substance abuse treatment facilities and providers, right? Not just with schools, but with a full array. So part of it has been working with staff to develop the skills, right? And we've done training, we've got technical assistance around that. How do I, as a probation officer, in addition to managing my caseload, what does that look like for me to go out and engage, right? So we've done that on many levels. On a larger level, we've reached out to an array from elected officials, Congress, Assembly, Council, community boards, right? We've had previous relationships and fostered new ones with community-based organizations, large and some small. So that's been part of it, right? It's just the actual work, the grind of hitting the pavement. I think one of the things that we benefited from, and I hope this speaks to your question, because everything I'm talking about, I think, helps to foster more trust amongst our clients. Because the people we're reaching out to are the people with whom we're connecting them, or with whom they may already be connected. So we're building this larger, trying to tap into this larger network and build networks. But one example I think that might kind of concretize it for us is that we did benefit from the Young Men's Initiative. In a large extent, it's a key part of the NEON because not only did we reintroduce ourselves to the community and move our staff there and begin to build relationships, but we brought some resources with us, Through the Young Men's Initiative, there were, on the adult probation side, there were 4 programs, Arches being one of them. Arches, if we take that for example, even our kind of procurement process, we didn't just do the standard government, issue the RFP, and then grade the proposal. We went out and we visited programs. We went to the basements of churches. We went all over the place to meet people who had proposed to do this work, some of whom didn't yet have their 501c3, right? So, but really going into the grassroots of the neighborhood to try to understand who were the people that were passionate and committed, not to exclude the large established organizations. And so through that type of work, we were able to foster relationships. We contracted big organizations and small ones, some of whom had to partner with the bigs in order to be part of the project. So that's one level, but then we also see that as an investment in the capacity of the local neighborhood to engage our folks, right? So it's building relationship, but it's investing in their capacity. And so now people like Abdul, he used the term credible messengers, people who have credibility, who have passion, commitment, and expertise, who previously weren't in the conversation, right? We're now bringing them into the conversation and actually literally contracting them, paying them, right, to do this work, right? Which I think is an important part of the process. It's funny, after I spoke, I don't want to, and I hope I didn't romanticize this, right? This is like, it's challenging, it's a grind, there's been several, examples of where folks in the community, didn't and perhaps maybe still don't trust us or understand or believe, right? But it's an ongoing process and way of doing work as much as it is. It's not a finished product. I don't think it ever will be. It's something that you continue to work at and you continue to grow.
You mind if I just want to say one thing. Also, like, the good piece about the credible messenger piece, like, I can play, people like myself could play on both sides, right? So you said about the barbershop. So we could come up with a concept. We go out and could talk to the businesses and to the barbershop and say, listen, we got 10 young men that are going to graduate from our program in the next couple of weeks. We need them to get haircuts. We're going to bring them in here. Oh, Abdul, it's going to cost. Well, no, we're not. We need you to do this on the hip for us, right? And we could work it out because our conversations are a lot different because now we talk to as we would say, our bros in the community. Our resources is rich just not only from with probation office, the probation department office as far as financial, but it's the personal resources that we have in the community. So, in like Clint was saying, it's not always wins. We don't get a lot of wins either, right? So we have kids who really just are not buying into this. They're so broken that they're not buying into the concept, right? And I think, like, initially before I came into, I just want to take it one step back. Before I came into Arches, I was doing some advocacy work in the South Bronx where we were dealing with a lot of shootings in the projects, right? A lot of our young brothers was just out there senselessly gunning each other down, right? So, and that was an issue in being able to go out there at night and dealing with these young brothers and standing out there with former gang members and things of that nature, just standing out there and telling these young brothers, listen, this can't happen in this community no more. We got to change it because you're not just killing each other, you're killing the babies. And that's not going to happen, right? And so having that credibility, like when they see us and be like, okay, now we see them again, and now we're not just fighting causes like stop and frisk. We're not, because that was a question that I know I was going through, issue I was going through. Well, they said, well, you're defending your community and you're defending the criminal, right? And I'm saying, yeah, that kind of was starting to resonate with me. That yeah, some of these kids that's doing this, quiet as kept. It needs to be some type of justice for this, and if we take it into our hands, it's only going to perpetuate this violence, right? Because we can do what we do, right? Street justice is just part of the code, right? Or we can say, we got to stop this from another angle. So I think the brothers that are involved, and I want to say people like SOS, I got to really say I am a product of Eddie Ellis. I received a scholarship for him to go back to college, and he's made a major impact in my life just knowing him, right? So stepping back and reevaluate what could I do, it was like, then we need to go to the front of this, right? When these kids are on probation.
Can we hold that thought? Because we have to do one more thought from the audience, and we can continue this after. But do you want to just
finish
I'm
real quick?
Getting some time eyes. So
okay, I just wanted to finish the real point was that going to the front of this, right, and working with these kids before they get to the level of that their level of frustration explodes and it becomes violent. Right, so that's the piece that works for us as far as dealing with the community basis. So our personal relationships and getting to the front of it before it gets to the end.
Thank you. We're short on time. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm Khalil Muhammad, director of the Schomburg Center, former fellow here at the Beer Institute. Happy to be back. I have a question about sort of the standards of success. And first of all, I think everything that all of you around the table are doing is terrific. This is, sort of a question about context and, I guess, sustainability. So I've heard the word recidivism mentioned a few times, and we've not, really talked about it. And I'm pleased to hear that people are sort of talking about those numbers, or at least don't seem to be particularly wedded to that. But we still have a fundamental culture in the criminal justice system and in our political culture that I argue flows from a space that we're only going to do so much because it sits in a place that says there's only so much you can do to help these people. And that, to me, goes back to something that Tracy mentioned early on, which is this earlier history of spaces that were dominated by communities of poverty and crime that were white in the early 20th century. And we tend to imagine today that there are limits to what you can do. And so people often operate at the margins. I think Vera operates at the margins. I spent a lot of time with Clinton. Programs like that operate at the margins. They are susceptible to shifts in political will. The budget crisis that exists in America today is contributing to a lot of synergy around these, but they don't cut at one argument would be the core of this. So my question is, are you all as individuals forcing funders, forcing government supporters and others to redefine what success means in these programs that is not, where recidivism does not become the primary instrument? And I'm gonna tell you why for me that matters, and it matters because none of you can control that random encounter with an abusive police officer that changes the course of that young man's life who you have devoted all of these resources in. That one moment of feeling put down, stigmatized, means he does something and now it's like, oh, your program's in jeopardy because your rates have just plummeted. Or the encounter with the other young man. Or the fact that we have an economic system that we know, point of fact, right? This has nothing to do with what black people are doing, cannot absorb all of the talent and will and ambition in our society, in which case, at some point, all the goodwill in the world coming out of Neon doesn't necessarily guarantee that those kids are going to end up with a job and a life. George Bush was famous for saying that an ownership society is the best guarantee that people will look after their own futures. Well, you can't have a sense of propriety if you have nothing to lose. And so if we're not offering them much more than good music, bright colors, a lot of attention and mentoring, that's not a put down. That's only to say that there is a structural reality that exists where many other people in this room have a lot to lose, which moderates their individual behavior, even when they're in the face of an abusive authority figure. So I'm asking the question, are you pushing for other measures of success that move us past recidivism, which can work against all of us at any given moment, no matter how hard we work to do this kind of work?
How long do you have for the answer?
Not very much time.
I can answer in 1 minute, I think. Yes and no. right? Yes, in that the theory that I was talking about clearly gives opportunities to think about other ways to measure success besides recidivism. So yes, I mean, when you're thinking about improving neighborhood social organization and enhancing the legitimacy of government in those spaces, that really opens up the space for thinking about how you would attack that and working with people and say, these are the things that you should look to. So, not just recidivism, but, you should be looking at surveys and changes. And, we do all of that work. No, in the sense that the particular instantiation of violence reduction programs that I've worked on for the purpose of enhancing social organization and legitimacy, I focus on three things. One is reduction of crime rates, which is different from recidivism, and it's a benefit for everybody who lives in that space, other than the people who are just actually those who are involved in the criminal justice system. So that's one. And two, I think much more important than recidivism is desistance. How long are you actually staying out of prison, even if you ultimately go back? And one quick thing on that, I think I have about 10 seconds. In Chicago, we found that the people who participate in our forums who are heavily gang involved, after 60 months, 5 years, almost all of them are back in prison, all of them. So on a recidivism measure, that's not successful. On the other hand, my statistical analysis shows that the people who are gang involved who participate in our forums stay out on the street longer. They're the last ones to go back. Right? So if you believe that, believe my numbers, then there's an opportunity for other people who are who have services and the like to intervene in the lives of that group. In contrast, the people who are not gang involved after 60 months are 33% more likely to be out on the street after 5 years. That's a huge success. So one simple thing you could do, other than focus on recidivism, is to look at just how long people are staying out.
There's some thought that we should wrap up and continue this because some people have to go to work, and it's a novel idea. But so maybe we can, because I feel like this could keep going on for a while, and so maybe we can just say thank you for coming and wrap it up and then continue talking because I want to hear the answers. But for those of you that have to go, thank you for coming. This was a great conversation as far as I'm concerned. And we can keep talking.
Well, Khalil, I take your question as also a huge and important challenge to us, to all of us, right? It's a question that we'll struggle to answer, but the fact is that I don't think that we have a lot of good answers to that question. Maybe theoretically there are some that we could come up with, and so I think it's really important. On one level, we've had conversations about the limits of measuring recidivism with funders and other of the powers that be, because even in the context of stop and frisk, we were having it, right? And so that conversation even impacted our policy and practice around reducing violations of probation. Previously, an arrest would trigger a violation, right? And so just something relatively as simple as saying, change that policy, an arrest does not equal a violation, is something that actually had a real impact for us and the thinking behind that. But then just in terms of measuring success, that the limits of that, for the reasons that you spoke, and even we've struggled with, and I continue to struggle with, the evidence, the measurement, the evidence of success in terms of not just recidivism, employment, education, the standard metrics that we're used to dealing with in our programs or through probation, they're not that they're not important, right? But that can't be the universe of measuring an experience of transformation that could be taking place, that I argue in many instances is taking place, but it's really difficult to measure. So it's not to run away from acknowledging or measuring those things, but that the limits of that. But then secondly, which I think is a bigger part of the question as I interpret it, is not to just work around the margins, as you put it, right? How do we go beyond the margins and really dig deep into the very core and structure of our society and the institutions that kind of perpetuate the disparities that we've been talking about, right?
Also, there's some things you can't measure, like hopelessness. You know, one of the mothers I talked to, of a kid that was shot, she said that she thought what was underneath it was a level of hopelessness in her neighborhood. I don't want to interrupt you. But
yeah, no, it's absolutely. But one thing, I think that the neons, though, because I would hope, and I think part of the questions was, what are we doing? What we need to do is to push that the neons aren't just wonderful community hubs, which is great, but that they become spaces where this conversation and the work can be enhanced to start getting at those core structural issues. So that's what I would say.
Well, and if I could just add one thing, I mean, this may not be radical enough, but I think, you know, one of the really exciting things about the NYCHA pilot is that we're in very close conversation with HUD about how it's going, what the challenges are, what the opportunities are. We're doing some similar work in New Orleans with the Housing Authority there on revising all of their admissions policies with regard to people with criminal conviction histories. And I hear from HUD that they're going to be issuing guidance for landlords, for housing authorities. So I think what we're learning on the ground in New York and in New Orleans certainly has broader ramifications. Now, how that flows from, you know, the federal government and their guidelines back down to all these local housing authorities across the country remains to be seen. But there are a number of really interesting things happening around the country, some of which we're involved with, some of which, you know, we're sort of cheering from the sidelines. And I think that as more of these things really take root and we really learn from them, it could reframe a little bit about how conversations go about who, you know, ought to be in public housing, or if those are really neighborhoods that are any more or less safe or deserving of services, or all of those other things that get wrapped into those discussions. So that gives me hope, and I think, you know, it also means that we have more of an opportunity to kind of impact change beyond, you know, the great stuff in New York City.
So I want to just really, like, for me, I don't, like the panelists said, I don't get funding, right? So I don't have any guidelines to work under. So really it's just about being in the community, doing the work. And I live in the community. You know, I didn't move out the community. I live in housing. I'm in the community. So for me, you know, to gauge success is really to see these young people just, you know, like I was just telling you about young man Malik. He got a job. Lloyd Jones, who's, you know, one of our young people, I'm going to mention his name, that's getting ready to go to college in September, who made a change being a part of the process, right? So yeah, we can, you know, they fit into their stats, but our stats in the hood is the fact that he's not running around with the gun. He's sitting, you know, he's walking away from fights, you know, things in the community right away. He's just making a decision to turn away. He's speaking to the truth. He's speaking to the issues now, so we could take him to other grassroots organizations, other teen groups, and say to them, "I need you to really tell them what your experiences are, and get them to understand that there's hope in this, right?" And they're doing that, right? So it's like the grapevine in prison, right? It really works, and it really works in the community. Like when we get a bunch of these young people and really give them this information, give them the tools, and say, okay, now we trust that you're going to use these tools, go and do it. As far as dealing, you made a statement about dealing with, you know, those moments where they have to, you know, where they're going to engage that officer in the community that's been harassing them for so long. Some of our young people learn how to deal with that and navigate through it, right? Because it's about survival for us. So we talk to our young people like, you have to survive no matter what happens. You have to get to the end, because when you get to the end of it, we're gonna help you again, right? And that's the thing. So we leave ourselves in the community, open to them. My phone stays on 24/7. So I have a job phone, I have a personal phone. My personal phone is for all my young people who don't necessarily make it to these programs, don't make it to a Arches, don't make it to a Neon, don't make it to Amir's conversation, who are out there, right? And they can call 24/7. My wife gets mad at me all the time. She says, "Yo, dog, you have kids here," and you're running out to see what's going on with another kid. And I tell her all the time, I said, well, if we don't deal with that kid there, that could be, he could victimize one of our kids here. So we have to really keep that up front, because if they don't have a way out, they're gonna turn it on us. They're gonna turn it in, right? And they're gonna work where they know, where they're comfortable, right? So crime, they don't go downtown to 42nd Street and commit crime because they don't know that area. But they know Heath Avenue, they know Kingsbridge Road, they know 225th and Broadway. They know those areas, right? So it's easier for them to find a victim there. And I live there, and I don't want to be a victim to my kids no more, because if I become a victim to my kid, then I have to think about how I'm going to retaliate, right? So there's a conversation, and we're going to keep it really, really blunt. This sometimes I say to a young person, I'd rather be your friend than your enemy. Because if I'm your friend, we can talk. But if I'm your enemy, we taking the gloves off. And that's part of the credible message, right? And some of these kids get that, because we have to sometimes lay it to them where they need to hear it and then bring them out of it, right? So we give it to them that way and bring them out of it and expose them to uncomfortability, like taking them to the library. I've been to the Schoenberg a few times with my young people, to the library to come and just be a part of your events down there. It's positive and it's powerful. And it starts that transformation piece. Like they're like, oh, there's really something else other than just being on 225th? Duh. That's what we've been saying.
I also just see you hug the kids that you work with.
Oh yeah, I didn't want to say that because some people might take that personal. I believe in that. The physical energy, right? And I believe in that. Like a handshake and a hug is as important as a punch, right? So to hug them and tell them, I love you today, that really sends a message to a young person that hasn't heard that from someone, and then for them to start to really believe that, because that's got to be consistent, right? Just to say that all the time. I love you today. And when I see you tomorrow, I'm going to love you tomorrow, even when you do something that goes against what we're working towards. So.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add, but it was more of an addition. I actually work for the Department of Probation. My name is Reagan Daly, and I oversee research and planning there. I actually used to be a VRN as well, pretty much the same as everybody else in this room. But just to sort of piggyback on the point that Quentin made about our definition of success and our measurement of success. So first of all, I definitely want to distinguish between measuring and defining, because the measurement is obviously in this arena a lot harder than defining success. But to the point of looking beyond recidivism. I mean, obviously we're a criminal justice agency. Recidivism is a measure of success for probation. It has to be in all of our initiatives. But beyond that, there is, our definition is broader in that we developed the NEONs and implemented the NEONs with an idea that there are certain things that are going to lead to reductions in recidivism, community engagement, family engagement, client engagement, positive development of these young people. And those, while they're definitely more difficult to measure than rearrest rates and reconviction rates, those are part of the NEON model, and we consider them equally important in our definition of success. Because if we're not engaging the client, engaging the community, that's fundamentally why we think we're going to improve recidivism rates as well. So I just wanted to add that point and let people know that it's definitely on our radar, as well as public safety and recidivism reduction. So sorry to throw that in after I feel like we've kind of gone around to a lot of other points, but
thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
How are you?
Nice to meet you. I feel really wonderful.
Do you have a card?